download our Revise It Right revision app for hundreds of videos, quizzes, exam questions, tutor support and so much more. This video is about metabolism and the liver. Now, metabolism is the sum of all the chemical reactions in an organism. Now, I know that can be quite difficult for some people because we grow up using the word metabolism and we tend to use it in a way that suggests that people with a fast metabolism are skinny and people with a slower metabolism tend to be a bit larger. So we tend to think of it that it's something to do with food and digesting food. And that really is only half the story. In fact, metabolism is the sum of all chemical reactions within an organism. So really think back to what we've learnt in biology so far, and all the reactions we've learnt, they are all come under what we call metabolism. So for example, respiration. That's an example of a metabolic reaction. Photosynthesis is also an example of a metabolic reaction in plants. The conversion of glucose to glycogen, which we're going to look at in a second, that's an example of a metabolic reaction. The conversion of amino acids to make proteins is an example of a metabolic reaction. The conversion of sugar into carbohydrates, and also the breaking down of carbohydrates into sugar. These are all metabolic reactions. So the point really that I'm trying to make is that metabolic reaction is every single chemical reaction that goes on within an organism, and it's all of those added together. It's the sum of all of those. When we talk about metabolic rate, we're talking about how quickly all of those reactions happen. Okay, so these here are examples of metabolic reactions. Remember to download our Revise It Right revision app, watch over 700 videos, answer 4,000 plus quiz questions, over 1,000 flashcards, 1,000 exam questions, worksheets, forums, and get help from qualified teachers and so much more. The link is in the description. Now, in the previous video, we learnt that during anaerobic respiration, lactic acid is produced by the equation glucose produces lactic acid. Now you'll remember me saying that lactic acid is actually quite dangerous and can cause muscle fatigue. So really we don't want the buildup of lactic acid, so we need a way to get rid of it. Okay, and that really is the role and the job, or one of the roles and one of the jobs of the liver. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to draw a muscle cell, for example. Now this muscle cell is anaerobically respiring and therefore it is producing lactic acid, which is C3H6O3. You don't have to remember that, that's just for my shorthand here. Now that travels to the liver, so it will diffuse into a blood vessel and it will travel via the bloodstream, so via the bloodstream to the liver. Now the liver is a very large organ that deals with lots of different things, but we're just going to look at it in terms of lactic acid for now. Okay, so this lactic acid goes to the liver and two things happen. Okay, one thing, it is combined with oxygen, okay, to make glucose. So one thing that happens is that it's combined with oxygen to make glucose. Now this glucose can then be used in respiration. Okay, so one thing is the lactic acid can be broken down with oxygen to make glucose, which can then be used in respiration. And then that can provide more energy if we need it. However, if that's not needed at the time, then that lactic acid can also be converted into something called glycogen. And that glycogen can actually be stored for later use. And this glycogen can then in the future be broken down into glucose and then used in respiration if it's needed in a later date. Okay, so just to quickly summarise, that lactic acid that is produced from anaerobic respiration travels to the liver via the bloodstream, and it is either converted into glucose to be used in respiration, and remember that's combined with oxygen, or it's converted to glycogen to be stored for a later use. Now we've got a term here at the top, oxygen debt. Now, oxygen jet is the amount of extra oxygen your body needs to react with the build-up of lactic acid and remove it from the cells. So that's quite a long-winded explanation, so let me just explain. Okay, oxygen jet is the amount of oxygen that's required to convert this lactic acid here back into glucose or glycogen to remove it completely from our cells. Now, imagine when you go running, you do a very short run, but you sprint. After that run, you're puffing and panting. But really, you should be asking yourself, why am I still puffing and panting if I no longer need oxygen? I'm no longer moving, therefore, why do I need oxygen so much? Why do I need this so much? And it's because of this thing called oxygen debt. We need that oxygen that we're puffing and panting to combine with the lactic acid so it can be broken down into something a bit that's not as dangerous, such as glucose and glycogen. So the oxygen debt is the amount of extra oxygen your body needs to react with this lactic acid to remove it from our cells. We would now like you to have a go at answering these questions here, and then we'll go through the answers together. So pause the video now. Okay, let's run through the answers then. So number 1, define metabolism. Well, metabolism is the sum of all the chemical reactions in an organism. Okay, so that's what we mean by metabolism, the sum of all chemical reactions in an organism. Give 4 examples of metabolic reactions. Well, we looked at quite a few. So you could have had respiration, you could have photosynthesis, you could have the conversion of glucose to glycogen, or the conversion of glucose to starch in plants, or the conversion of glucose to cellulose in plants, or the breaking down of protein to amino acids, or the building up of amino acids to make protein, and so on. There's loads of metabolic reactions. Number 3, what is cellulose used for? It's used for cell walls. Question 4, how does the liver break down lactic acid? Well, it combines it with oxygen to either produce glucose, which can be used in respiration, or glycogen, which can be stored for later use. How is the liver involved in the breakdown of lactic acid? Well, as we just said, it is combined, the liver combines lactic acid with oxygen to break it down into glucose or to break it down into glycogen for future use. When is glucose converted to glycogen in the liver? That is when the glucose is not needed for respiration. And question 7, what is the name of the organelle which makes proteins for amino acids? It is the ribosomes. So we've now there looked at metabolism and what metabolism is and some examples of that, and then how the liver is involved in the breaking down of lactic acid. If you completely understand that, you can move on to the quiz and to the exam questions. However, if you do need help, please contact one of our tutors and they will be happy to help.